we're in, it's called The Book That Made Your World. We're in chapter 7. The book is, it's called The Book That Made Your World. And this is a very good correction. There's a lot of things I want to say about it to get started. So and the guy's name, I forget. All right, so great guy. What is it? That guy. So he's awesome. Great guy. So look it up, just The Book That Made Your World. You'll see it. The guy's great. Buy it. But the reason I want to tell you about this book, the reason I like it so much, is you've been fed a constant diet of sort of anti-Western rhetoric. And it, in so many ways, it infiltrates the church. So you hear church leaders give these caveats all the time. Basically about the culture and how we're supposed to act in the culture, how we're supposed to live in the culture, not realizing that the attacks on the West are attacking the presuppositions that came from the Bible. What's unique is that the country you live in right now, those presuppositions have built the things that made this country prosperous, that have made this country awesome. One of the things that this country has that I think is it's so abused right now is the notion of our economy and our technology. We're going to get to that tonight. A lot of times, I mentioned this, I love to pick on David Platt for this, but I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but he wrote a book called Radical, remember? And I told about this, how he talks about how, hey, look, instead of buying that new TV, you should save your money and downgrade your house so that you can go to Africa. Now, is it good to go to Africa? Yes. Is it good to not be to be owned by your stuff and have idolatry? Yes. But there's a mistaken notion that we somehow are helping the impoverished by not buying or consuming products. And I agree with you that sounds absurd that would be the case. But we live in a world right now where as you buy something, that some person is employed, and that person has employees, and that person employs other people. So, the age-old question, if you had $5 and there's a hot dog vendor and a homeless person, what should you do with that $5? And some people say, well, you just give it to the homeless guy. I'm like, well, so then the hot dog guy goes out of business and he doesn't feed his family, and then those guys don't get to do it? So you have another homeless guy? Do you ignore the homeless guy? Some people say, well, you buy the hot dog and then give it to the homeless guy. I'm like, all right, but then now, so you see, you have a whole scenario of games you have to think about. But the Bible does have something to say about it, but what we're used to thinking about when it comes to economies and governments and things like that, we're used to being abused and having the Bible thrown at us to make you feel like you're not generous. And so one of the things that's fascinating is, again, if you look at the political talk when it comes to money right now, most of that talk is centered on government's ability to spend money, big government spending lots of money for things. And so people talk about the government solving our problems and whatnot. And I mentioned before that most of that comes from a misplaced idea of generosity. So it's seen to be generous when you vote for a subject that's going to help a needy person. But when you're voting, what you're not doing, and this is something I need to say to you, and you know this, but let me just remind you again. If I vote, if you have a bill, and the bill says, do you want to help homeless people? Well, everyone wants to help homeless people. And so what are you actually voting for when you say, yes, I want to help homeless people? What you're voting for is to give money to homeless people, right? Yes, where does that money come from? We say, well, from the government. But the government doesn't have money. Not actually. They don't actually produce it. Well, they kind of do. Technically, they do print it now, which is worse because they take away everyone. Printing the money is really just, don't let me get into that. But the government has everyone else's money. So what you're voting for in your compassion is for the government to take other people's money to give to other people. You in no way are generous in doing that. In fact, if the more you vote for that because you want to get something from it, you're literally taking part in a covetousness that doesn't like that someone else has something that you want. It's theft, and theft is the other thing, right? So when you look at this idea, you think to yourself, well, does that mean people should be selfish? And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying when you actually look at what's alleviated poverty and that's lifted the quality of life, that's done more to help poor people around the world, it hasn't been evangelism like you would think, it's been capitalism. And we don't like capitalism. We say it's such a bad word. We've been grown up to hear capitalism such a bad word. But it's lifted the standard of living across the board, across the world, more than any other thing has. It's taken more people from life-changing poverty into the ability to live without those same diseases, without those same death rates, with have more hope in their life. The actual ability to make a living in countries that you've never imagined, that when they start to have less corruption, when they're allowed to have more ability to keep what they earn, the standard quality of life for more people goes up. More homeless people are less homeless. More poverty is less poverty. More people are doing better than ever before. What happens is, as the government comes in and starts to take more of everyone's money, the idea is, well, no, everyone's going to have equity and everyone's going to be equally poor. So the argument isn't to raise everyone up to have a higher quality of life, it's to lower everyone down so that everyone has the same misery, except for the people on the top. Now, I say all this to say that, well, Matt, what does that have to do with the Bible? More than you think, particularly when it comes to the ideas of technology. Now, I want to say these things to you because I want you to think. Don't just listen to propaganda. The whole point of this book is for you to stop being cowed and bullied by super, super, super dumb, ad hominem, non sequitur arguments that are just thrown out all the time. Like, you don't have to be emotional. When people say stupid things, you don't have to reply back with, nah, you can actually know things, right? So when you listen to the whole talk about CRT and systemic racism, this is another idea of leveling the play. It has nothing to do with actual racism. It has to do with systems, not people, systems. And it's just Marxism disguised emotionally with language that comes from the civil rights movement, but has nothing to do with civil rights. In fact, one of the biggest criticisms that CRT has against people is they say, if you say you're colorblind, if you want to look at the content of someone's character, not the color of their skin, they say, that's racist. Google it. This is considered one of the biggest signs of racist. They just put Ibrahim X. Kendi, the doofus who wrote that stupid book that's bilking everyone for cash. That's is he at Boston University or whatever now? Talk about it. Sorry. God help me. I mean, talk about just a charlatan though. Like, and his argument is, if you're, as you go through, the whole point is basically to take power. It is the same game that's playing with the economy, with the environment, with each of these places. But in each case, the idea is to lessen your ability to produce, to own, to earn. It's taking away that ability in every case, right? And to make you dependent on the government. But why would the government want you dependent on it? Stop and ask yourself that question. Like, why would it want me dependent on it? Like, if you ask yourself this question. And so it comes from this notion of control and this pagan notion of control as you go back to. We tend to think that if people were given, and that one of this chapter is going to get to is that people in general want to invent things. That if there's a problem, human ingenuity comes through. And that's actually not the case. If you don't have the Bible, you know what you have? You not only have paganism, you also have worldwide poverty and enslavement. True story. Let's talk it out. Let's talk about this book. Okay, so why did the monks develop technology? That's a question that like a first grader would ask you, and you're like, I don't even know where you got that from. Like, why did the monks invented technology? How do you invent technology? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Let's go through it. So in the summer of 2000, this guy was invited to the University of Nations in Jinja, Uganda, to teach a course on the foundations for community development. Unfamiliar with the area, I assumed that I was going to see a desert, but before the plane landed in the city of Entebbe, which is great, we just had people there, I was pleasantly surprised to see lush greenery. En route to the university campus, I observed hundreds of women and children hauling water on their heads. Now, I love this because it's intense. They're good at it. Now, we went, one of those trips when I was in Uganda, we went right before my wife had Guinevere. So this was, 12 years now. And we get off one of the buses, Paul and I, and it was raining, and this woman had two kids. One of the children was on her back. The other child was holding her hand, and he had a chicken in his hand, and she had a suitcase on her head and like something else, and she was walking through the rain like, what? And I'm like, dang, that's intense. And how do they have their kid? They just go out in the field and just do it. I'm like, whoa, hardcore. So we get back, and we're having a baby, and there's this nice hospital, and there's like what do they give you, phentermine in the back for the epidural, thank you very much. Do you know that's what's it called? Not phentermine. It's what is it? Yeah, but you know what it is? It's the drug everyone wants. Fentanyl. Thank you, fentanyl. And you're getting fentanyl on your back. Anyways, just so you know, which is awesome. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. But we had the Cadillac birth. I just come from Africa, and the whole time I'm like, hey, in Africa, my wife's like, shut up. Anyways, and so in Africa, he goes there. You've got this lush greenery. Clearly, people have a lot of like resources and capability, but there's women carrying stuff on their heads everywhere, right? He goes, the site reminded me of home where this guy lives in India, rural India. And he says it's the women and girls, not boys, who carry water. Indian cities have water pipes coming into homes, but many of them do not actually bring water. Think about that. Rapid, unplanned urbanization coupled with corruption has made it difficult for cities to keep up with growing demand for water. Now you say to yourself, that's absurd. And yet we're told that the water prices in this state right now are going to go up astronomically high based on some taxes and based on the fact that even though we've had more rain than ever, we're still We don't have enough water that's under the ground or something because whatever, the stupidity is absurd. But he says it's common to see people lined up at community taps waiting to fill their vessels with water and carry them to their homes that actually have pipes that aren't bringing water. So my first morning in Jinja, I learned that I was staying on the shores of Lake Victoria at the source of the legendary White Nile River. I had no idea that Lake Victoria was the world's second largest freshwater lake. Nor had I imagined the Nile to be so gigantic at its origin. The excess Lake Victoria with such force that the British built a hydroelectric dam at Jinja, which generates so much electricity that some of it's actually sold to Kenya. And yet they don't have water going into the pipes at those places in India. So you think about it, the abundance of water and electricity made me wonder why women in that environment would be carrying water on their heads morning and evening, 365 days a year. Stop and ask yourself this question, like, why would you do that? Right? And it says, were they unaware of pumping technology? I mean, and this is the case. If you go to like many missionary organizations, they'll come in and like, we're going to go to them and teach them technology about how to get water. I'm like, they have the technology. They've had the technology forever, right? Were they unaware of the technology pumping? That couldn't be the case because across the field from my residence was an industrial complex owned by Indians. I could hear the pump that supplied water to their 2,000 homes directly from Lake Victoria. By the fourth day, it became difficult for me to respect a practice that forced women to engage in this drudgery while many men sat and played cards. Using their muscles to bring water was not merely a waste of billions of hours of labor. It also meant that families did not bathe enough, flush enough, or wash enough. Drinking from insufficiently washed glasses and eating inadequately washed food from unacceptably washed dishes with improperly washed hands or cutlery are sure ways to get infected with easily avoidable diseases. It means wasting further time and resources to cure illnesses. It condemns a whole people to work at a fraction of their energy. It produced stunted women and children who have less time than others to play, learn, and be creative. It epitomizes the oppressive headship of husbands and the callous rule of a community. Now let me stop and make sure you don't miss something here. You are literally in the midst of a green revolution that is attempting to get you to do this very thing. So instead of driving cars that go to normal places, we're going to make everything, again, I keep going back to this, because of the green ideas that we're saying, that you're going to have the less ability. For example, like our electrical grid works less well, like it's less well than it did before. We won't upgrade it. Yeah, we want everything to go on it. Right? And the whole point is, well, maybe you should use, and you'll get articles that basically says, instead of our technology solving our problems, which we have, we want to regulate the crap out of it. And so what happens? We don't have it. So now what is the message you get from Mother Government? It is, you should have lowered expectations for your quality of life. Less AC, less heat. Like, for example, when they say all the heat, air conditioning is a great thing. Like, air conditioning is the devil. I'm like, well, seems to work well in Las Vegas. And they say, no, it's adding carbon to the air. I'm like, but more people die, when you talk about these types of things, like AC really helps people a lot. And so you start to say, well, no, let's get rid of AC. Let's get rid of all those things that are like convenient for your life because of climate change. But if you go back to the specter of climate change, it's bringing you back the whole picture of the green movement. And I'm just being honest. If you're in the green movement, I'm not saying you're the devil. You just work for the one. I'm just being honest but whatever. If you're in it, whatever. I'm not against you. I'm against your boss. Just kidding. No, but like it's going to make you poorer and less capable of enjoying the things you have in life. And there's a reason for that. Right? There's a reason for doing that. As you have less technology, you realize technology is purposefully and incontrovertibly linked to the Christian worldview. And as the world becomes more pagan, guess what starts to go away? Technology. And so as you notice, you say, well, we have so much technology. And I'm like, and we're getting dumber with it. And I'm saying that is what I just said tonight is a profoundly provocative statement. I literally said that technology is linked to the Christian worldview. Just let me put this up here so you don't miss this. I'm saying something that should offend you. If you tune in right now and you hear what I just said, and you're just like somebody, you're going to be like, that guy's a buffoon. What did you just say? That is an absurd statement. In fact, I'm okay if we just stop tonight and you just literally go home and reflect on the fact I just said this all week long and come back offended next week to hear what I'm going to say because it's that offensively crazy what I just said. Let me say this. Technology is linked, to the Christian worldview. You get rid of the Christian worldview, you get rid of technology. And you see a devolution of technology, which is what you're going to see. Literally right now, we're saying, hey, let's not use nuclear power, like we use for our submarines that keep us safe. Let's just go back to using wind and water. In Europe, just this last summer, coming into the winter that we're going to be having right now, people were waiting in line, and people were cutting down trees for people to use to actually heat their homes, like we're way back in the peasantville of the ancient, Middle Ages here. Because of the technology places of, first of all, shutting down pipelines, shutting down gas production, petroleum production. So we say, no, you're going to actually use coal to heat your homes. You're going to wait in line to get enough coal or to get enough wood to heat your homes, like we're way back in the day. And that's supposed to be considered progress. Think for yourself about the crazy, egregious irresponsibility of our leaders to get to a place where people in this day and age would have to do that. What would happen? How would it happen that way? And if you think, well, that would never happen to us. Look what's happening right now in the car manufacturers. You think cars are just going to always get better? If people have their way, they're going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse very, very quickly. And you say, well, no, it's cool. I've got my electric car. Well, electric cars are great until they can turn them off, right? The abundance of water and electricity made me wonder. Okay, so he goes on. He says, that experience raised the questions. Why don't American women haul water on their heads, right? Why did Western people begin using their minds to do what most cultures use their muscles to do? Honestly, that is a profoundly important question. Technology is magic of the mind. When you use the mind, that is technology, water brings itself to you. Water produces electricity, and electricity pumps water right into your home. I have a water bottle right here. By the way, I should get a QR code. Someone help me set this up for everything I buy, because I'm going to sell it to you. I can't help it, because if I like it, I think it's the best, and I think you should have it too. But I have this water bottle. This water bottle literally cleans my water for me, so I never have to wash my water bottle, ever. And it smells great. I don't have to do anything. Guess what? You could go wash your water bottle all the time, or you could just have something that washes itself for you that's always clean. I could go into Mexico, pour tap water in this thing, and it's totally, totally clean because it uses UVC light technology. That's what technology does. So now, instead of having to go into the place and scrubbing my water and getting a filter, I can just use this thing, and it does it for me. I have a person walking around to clean my water. Technology, like when Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes and he says, look, I have slaves, and you're like, slaves, that's so terrible. But he talks about concubines and singers, and he has people that carry his carts. Literally, when you drive your car, it'd be the equivalent of being back in the day, someone carrying you on a thing, and people running next to you singing. And you want to change the station. And so then other singers come and replace them to sing a song you're in the mood for. And while you're in that, you want the AC. So then you have other slaves that came and start like waving air on you. And he's like, I think I want to heat my seat. So someone else comes with a little coal to put under your butt as you go. Literally, that's what you have right now. That's what you have right now. It's going away. It's better. We should go back to the old days. Organic food. Nothing wrong with organic food. But But you get what I'm saying, GMOs are killing you. All right, I love my GMOs. All right. So, but he says technology is a magic of the mind, right? When you bring water brings itself to you. Water produces electricity, and electricity pumps water right into your home. So does nuclear. By using their minds instead of their muscles, a handful of people can supply more water to 1 million homes than can 1 million people hauling it on their heads. Neither Africa nor India lacks ingenious minds. Right? The Egyptians living along the Nile built the pyramids while barbarians inhabited Western Europe. This is a very profound book. The problem was that the engineers who made pyramids to honor the bones of kings and queens did not bother making wheelbarrows for their slaves. Stop and let you. This is a powerful sentence. A lot of this chapter is going to be like, wow, that's good. Would you look at that? Notice what he just said again. They have the capacity to make the pyramids, but they didn't deign to make wheelbarrows for their slaves. Why? Why not? Why not? They're not dumb. They made the pyramid. That's a big deal. No, aliens did it. Some husbands who care for their wives do in fact make wheelbarrows in Uganda. It takes only a few sticks and a wheel. Good for them. But my experience in Ginger refuted the proverb. Listen to this. My experience refuted the proverb that necessity is the mother of invention. Every family needs water, right? So what if a wife can't bring enough water? You say, well, I guess we should invent something. Oh, no. In that case, most cultures just took a simpler route than inventing technology. Men just forced their children to work, and they took additional wives, or they bought slaves. The Hindus persuaded a caste that God created them to be water haulers. Literally, they persuaded an entire people that you were born to literally carry my water. There's our answer. And that their salvation lay in fulfilling their dharma, doing their caste duty generation after generation. I mean, are you okay with that? Think about this. It is fashionable to reject technology today. Mahatma Gandhi opposed technology, and in the city of Jinja there's a huge statue erected in honor of him. The problem is that the cultures that reject technology end up forcing human beings to get their water, grind their grain, and even to clean their dry latrines. Let's take a step back. What's happening in California right now? We decided that the baby boom generation didn't want to have enough kids, and we decided that kids are a burden, so we stopped having kids. And so our birth rate isn't replacing the workforce we need. But the powers that be in California basically said, well, we need people to work, so what we'll do is we just, instead of having families enfranchised to have kids, that's too much middle class. No, we'll just import workers from another country, which is why the border is open. Because people are saying, well, I'm sorry, I'm just being honest though. That's the truth. Like you're saying, well, what's going on here? The idea is, well, I don't need to actually have an economy that functions. I can actually have an economy where we have wealthy people and I can essentially have slaves imported from another country to raise my kids, to wash my dishes, and to do the things for me. That's literally what's happening in our nation right now, and particularly in our state. You have millionaires and you have military and then you have servants. And that's basically the vision, but it's totally against the founding of this nation, which had a promise that was very different. If I'm offending you right now, you can be offended, but talk to me afterwards and actually make an argument. But otherwise, let's just keep going. So I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just tired of dumb things, and this is the moment to not be dumb, right? So, all right. Aldous Huxley was a distant devotee of Mahatma Gandhi, a promoter of Buddhism, and a pioneer of contemporary environmentalism. He blamed Christianity for the ecological crisis of the modern world, and he believed that technology developed in the West because, according to the Bible, God commanded human beings to establish their dominion as stewards over the earth. It's interesting sometimes how someone's criticism of you can actually be so accurate in so many ways. Aldous Huxley says the Bible's so bad because it made people have technology. Now, we would say it did. And technology is ruining the world. That's why, again, environmentalism, when they talk about an area that you should go to, they say it's unspoiled, which means people aren't there because we're the problem in environmentalism. So technology that actually feeds people, technology that actually lets people live, which is why we're still literally saying we're not going to have enough water because there's one type of fish that might not like the fact that you actually have enough water for people. We're not going to build homes in this area because there's a slug that lives there. And so since we're going to value that ecological environmental movement, we won't let you build homes so people can live. So instead we're going to have an urban sprawl over here, and we're going to have a housing crisis with people in tents crapping on the street. True story. We won't do it because we're and so the argument of human beings being the problem is, well, we got to save these areas from humans. I'm okay, Huxley's viewpoint began to be taken seriously after Lynn White Jr., a professor of history at Stanford, Princeton, and the University of California, Los Angeles, endorsed it in an article in Science magazine. So White's historical research was impeccable. His interpretation of the sociology of the technology seems right. He makes a valid criticism that Western civilization, including the church, has often affirmed man's value at the expense of nature's value. It's true that they would say, man's so great, so chop that tree down, right? But nevertheless, it's usually the case that pollution kills far more people in technologically less advanced non-biblical cultures. There's a reason why famines don't kill people in the United States like they do in other places. There's a reason that technology does it. It's a big deal. Cultures that can't pump water into their homes can't flush their toilets. Now, the more you give the ability to, in the past, you used to have your own well. In the past, the idea that you can actually have solar power and a battery, but you don't actually get to keep it without being taxed on, it's yours. Think about this. The government shouldn't own the air. It shouldn't own the water. It has to make sure that it's safe. But this idea that people can do this, it's a big, big deal, right? Cultures that can't pump water in their homes, they can't flush their toilets. In India, the lack of running water led to a shameful Hindu practice that embarrassed Mahatma Gandhi, but still practiced, forcing people called untouchables to carry other people's poop in containers on their heads. There you go. Why? Because they didn't have good plumbing. So you say to yourself, why do they have to do that? That's so terrible. I'm where do you want the poop to go? Well, it could go into plumbing. Oh, technology's evil. Oh, but it's not evil to force people to carry it on their heads for you? Critics who blame a Judeo-Christian worldview for the technology-created ecological problems such as global warming may be wrong about science, but at least they're right about history. Technology is a fruit of a biblical worldview. Let me just take one step back. I mentioned before, when you look at the argument for fossil fuels being bad for the environment, that's hard to argue in every case. Remember back in the day, some of you're all too young for this, but they used to have this thing called the ozone, and that we needed to have more trees because we had to have more carbon in the air, right? And now it's carbon's the problem, so we got to get rid of carbon. I'm wait, you guys got to figure out. It used to be global warming, then it was global cooling, and then global warming, then it's finally just climate change. changing is bad. Like, we're like, okay, just whatever it is, But if you stop and think about it, for the EV car argument, many people say that fossil fuels cause the world to be unstable because we have to get our fuels from like places like Saudi Arabia. I'm like, that's only because we don't have our own fuels here. Like, we can, with the fracking we got rid of and the drilling, we said, let's not do it. So let's just buy it from Saudi Arabia. Like, doesn't make sense. But regardless, put that away. It's like, well, no, EV's like cleaner and it's going to be less crazy. I'm like, you think that do you know where we get the cobalt? You know where we get the lithium and the places? It's mining deep into African countries that are war-torn warlords full of corruption. You think those places are going to be a more humane way of getting fuel for people? You think the wind farms are more environmentally friendly as they grossly make the environment look terrible, kill all the birds that are going by? You think when someone blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was the greatest, environmental disaster that's happened in our lifetime for a political stunt, like that people might be serious? You think that Bill Gates buying places on the coastline might be like a little bit obvious there? But anyways, I'm just like trying not to have a screed as I go. But the Bible itself demands or defends at least one aspect of the critique of technology, which is this: the human heart and mind have been corrupted by sin. So when we talk about capitalism and the rest, and technology and the rest, it's all predicated on the idea that man is selfish. So on the one hand, we say you should keep what you earn because you're made in God's image. It's also predicated on the idea that you will want to work harder because you're a selfish person and you like it when you get to keep your stuff. Right? So when you're in a group project in school and you all get the same grade, whether you work hard or not, what happens is the one smart kid that actually cares about it does the work and everyone else parties, which was my way through school. When I had group projects, I'd have someone else do it and I would just enjoy myself, right? That's what you do. You make friends with. I had a girl in high school, sorry, Aaron, who took my Spanish test for me in the middle of class. I wasn't a Christian. I was like trying to cheat on my test, and she said, let me just do it. She just took the test and turned it in for me. I'm like, great, now I'm a Christian. I'm like, you should come to church, Aaron. Sorry about that. I'm confessing to you my sins. But anyways, some of our choices are destructive, and even choice made in good faith can be harmful, okay? And like, I get that. But the idea that creativity results in technology, it can be abused, and it has been abused. That's normal, right? That's a normal thing. In most cultures, the ruling elite patronize technology if it made them stronger than their enemies, right? If you talk about the technology of warfare, right? That's a big thing. They welcome technology for war, for pleasure, for prestigious monuments, and the oppression of their people. This is normal for societies. But there's only one culture ever that has promoted technology for general welfare and for liberating and empowering the weak: slaves, women, children, the handicapped, and the poor. And it's not the LGBTQ transgender flag. It is the Bible. It is the only group, the only culture, the culture built by this book is the only culture in the history of the world that has promoted, generated, and put forth technology for the general welfare. I mentioned last week, global free trade, and there's problems with it breaking down. America has taken it on the chin. Trump is right when he says it, but he's wrong when he says it. He says no one's paying their fair share. We're like, that's the point. Again, America has decided to be poorer in one sense to let everyone have a chance to be rich in one sense. Now, there's abuses there needs to be regulation, but when you understand this idea is a good old-fashioned Western idea that has now been totally taken over by the parasite called liberalism. But regardless, Professor Lynn White Jr. thoroughly documented that humanizing technology came out of biblical theology. He says the humanitarian technology that our modern world has inherited from the Middle Ages was not rooted in an economic necessity. Let me say it again. The technology we have was not rooted in economic necessity. In other words, people were like, we need to get water over here. We should invent something. That's not what happened. For this necessity is inherent in every society. Yet it's found inventive expression only in the Occident, that is the West, nurtured in the activist or volunteerist tradition of Western theology. It is the only place that's developed technology. Why? Well, it is ideas which make necessity conscious. The labor-saving power machines of the later Middle Ages were produced by the implicit theological assumption of the infinite worth of even the most degraded human personality, by an instinctive repugnance towards subjecting any man to a monotonous drudgery which seems less than human in that it requires the exercise neither of intelligence nor of choice. There's a reason why piling rocks in prison is meant to dehumanize you, because you would pile rocks. I don't think they let you do that anymore, but the punishment is you would pile rocks all day and then you'd have to unpile them. You'd have to dig a hole and then fill it. It's meant to make you feel meaningless and less than human. And so what Christians did when they see the labor happening, they're like, this person is spending all their time doing this. And we do this in the church. When we would upload a video, it used to take 8 hours to render the stupid video. And we're like, if we spent $1,000 on this one computer, it could render it in 10 minutes. We're like, what's worth $1,000 or 1,000 hours for the rest of our lives of you doing your life? And so the old school people would say, well, it's okay. It's just Bryant doing it, or it's just Brett doing it, or something else. Their 1,000 hours are fine. Or we could say, no, their time is worthwhile. We should spend this money so we can have this technology. That's a Christian idea. Now, we take for granted in the West that people have that, but that came from the Bible. Professor David Landis studied clock making in China, and he concluded that the development of technology is not merely a matter of ingenuity. Again, the Chinese had technical ability, yet clock making did not become an industry, nor did it become a source of continuing and growing technological innovations in China as it did in Europe. But why? Well, the Chinese were keen neither to know time nor to organize their lives accordingly, so no clocks. The development of the water mill illustrates that culture is as important for the development of technology as ingenuity is. In other words, you can have the smartest people in the world, but if they grow up under a culture that doesn't have these values, then that smartness is wasted on other things. That's a big statement, guys. It's a big, just bold, juicy statement. In 1935, Mark Bloch published his finding that the water mill had been invented at least a century before Christ. That's a long time ago. Later, its usefulness for grinding grain was known in Afghanistan on the border of geographic India. Almost everyone needed to grind grain. So, right? Everyone should want this. Yet, the use of the water mill never spread in Hindu, Buddhist, or later Islamic cultures. Christian monks in Europe, and we're talking thousands of years after Christ, were the first to begin the widespread use of water mill for grinding and for developing power machinery. Guys, come on, that's crazy. The question is, what accelerated Western technological progress in the Western Middle Ages? What does that mean? Well, listen to this. The above question was the topic of a 1961 Oxford Symposium on scientific change spearheaded by Aleister Crowley. The best answer for the question, what accelerated Western technological progress, was by this guy named Ernst Benz, who published a seminal essay in 1964 called Fondamenti Cristiani della Tecnica Occidentale. Is that pretty good? It doesn't matter, it sounded good. I think it was probably right. It demonstrated that Christian beliefs provided the rationale and the faith and motive energy for Western technology. Christian faith. And so when the old school thing you heard literally 10 years ago that Christianity was against science was not only just the stupidest argument, it was the exact opposite. It's secularism divorced from Christianity that killed science. So then we're left with Fauci saying, I am science. That's what we get. Benz had studied and experienced Buddhism in Japan, and the anti-technological impulses in Zen led him to explore whether Europe's technological advances were somehow rooted in Christian beliefs and attitudes. His research led him to the conclusion that the biblical worldview was indeed the key to understanding Western technology. Guys, so in other words, this is back in the 60s. This is not this guy writing a book just saying, let me just invent some stuff and just like shoot it out at you. Like these are like studied things. This is the Oxford Symposium on Scientific Change. It's a big deal. So this is the idea. Christendom pioneered technological creativity because the Bible presented a God who was a creator. Neither a dreamer nor a dancer, as Indian sages believed. God was the architect of the cosmos. He was a doer, in other words. He shaped man out of clay as a potter does, making man in his own creative image and commanding him to rule the world creatively. That's a big statement, that last thing. It's called the cultural mandate. Right? Jesus Christ's incarnation in a physical body and his bodily resurrection instilled into Christian philosophers the unique idea that matter was created for a spiritual purpose. Romans 12 is redeeming this again. I want to say this again, Christian. Romans 12, 1-2. Look at this. He says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, which is your spiritual worship. We have gotten this mistaken notion, which comes from a Greek theology, not from the Bible, that your spirit is separate from your body. But the way we worship spiritually is not something that happens in the ether. Your spiritual worship is something you do with your body. And the reason we offer our bodies as a living sacrifice as our spiritual worship now is because the whole point of you getting a new body is that you're going to have a better ability to worship God in heaven. But our worship has always been and will always be an embodied worship. An embodied worship. And so that's kind of an amazing thing. We tend to think of worship as merely a mental state of mind or something like that, but worship is something we do with our bodies. And so we keep saying, I said it again and again, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started to really hit on this idea that the entire idea of the Christian resurrection is going against this Platonic idea that matter is bad. And again, that matter matters, that it is good and it's for a good purpose, which means that the things you do with your body matter, which means all of a sudden wasteful work matters. Redeeming the time matters. How you spend your time matters because what you do with your day matters. Your sleep pattern matters. Like that's just kind of the idea here. That's a freeing idea. He goes, the Bible and benchmarks the Judeo-Christian worldview of reality and destiny produce and nurture technology in 4 ways. Here's what he says. First, the Bible emphasized intelligent craftsmanship in the world's design. In other words, the world God designed is pretty awesome. When you study out, you're like, hey, God did that. That's cool. Second, the Bible says that human beings participate in divine workmanship by being good artisans themselves. So when God made us artists, some of you do wonderful art. Some of you build stuff with your minds. You do Roblox even, let's say, right? You write things. Maybe you just like to watch TV and laugh a lot. That's cool. We like laughter too. We need people down there too. But the Bible taught that we follow divine example when we use the physical universe for righteous ends. All right? And fourth, the Bible challenged the West to use time wisely because each moment is a valuable one-time opportunity. And so, for example, one of the challenges that we have is to understand the value of your time. This is a Christian, it is a concern that everyone has, but contrast this. Like if you go to a Buddhist monastery, you go to a Buddhist monk, and he says, let's just sit here all day and do nothing. It's not even praying. It's doing nothing. I'm like, well, what about hanging out with the kids? He's like, no, you got to get rid of that. Okay, so hanging out with your kids is a problem. What about exercise? Nope, that's bad. Going to the bathroom? Yep, so you got to deal with it, but your body's, you can only get rid of that. Eating? Yeah, I don't want to eat too much. No eating. You want to do nothing. So Buddhism is really saying everything you do with your body is worthless and terrible. You got to get rid of your body and your thoughts and your mind and all the things that make you you. You got to get rid of it. The Bible's the opposite. It's saying play with your kids. It matters. The interruption matters. The conversation matters. The things matter that you do. Showing up matters. Being at church actually in person matters, right? The Gnostic tendency is, well, no, I'm worshiping online. I'm like, oh, really? You took communion online? You know? Could you smell the perfume of the person that God wanted you to smell through the screen? Oh, I have a scratch and sniff on my computer. Okay, great. That's great. All right, but listen to this. Many scholars have reinforced, expanded, and qualified the thesis that we just read, right? So, for example, Robert Forbes of Leiden and Samuel Sambursky of Jerusalem pointed out as early as 1956 that technology arose because Christianity destroyed classical animism. Let me just say this again. Technology arose, right? Tech came because the cross destroyed animism. We'll call this pantheism. In other words, the cross destroyed, what's that movie that just came out that I like, that was so good, James Cameron, that you want to see and be one of them? Avatar. Avatar is animism. It's beautiful. Wouldn't it be great if like the fish talked to you and you had the whale that you rode that was like your whale, and you watch that movie, you're like, I'm part of everything too. And it talks to me. And you just feel like, and look how man is depicted. Man's just ugly, these ugly guys, these ugly machines. They can't do the guy's like a bad guy, he's a military guy. Look at their oil and they have like smoke coming out of their machines and the guys are like going through air like this. You're like, man, I really like the machine guy, right? I'm like, yeah, but you're watching this driving through a machine to go sit and watch a movie put by a machine. You don't have guys acting out in front of you. You're not watching a play. Like the irony is amazing, right? Because the idea is that an animism is, no, go back to being part of everything. You can be part of something. Your life feels lonely because you're not part of everything. And your life feels lonely because you're not part of the body of Christ. You're not part of the church. Not because you're not part of everything. But the Bible destroying animism is where technology came about. Now think about the contrast. In Avatar, the argument is get rid of technology. All you need is flying pterodactyls, man, and like spears. Don't we all wish we were kind of like avatars? In fact, like our salvation would come by going back to being an avatar, right? Who wants to be in a squatty body after that? Like, right? You're like, man, it'd be so much cooler to like swing through the air and be awesome. Nope. So no one wants technology, but notice what it's trying to sell you on. And that's the contrast. Well, the Bible, they're correct in like putting the Bible, and they'll put that with Christian worldview. The Bible, again, destroyed animism. This is such a big statement. The biblical cosmos was enchanted. So the Bible affirmed the existence of spirits, demons, and angels. So we say that it's enchanted, which in other words, we agree that the world is enchanted, that God is fully in charge. There's spirits in the world. There's all these things. However, the Bible also secularized the physical universe, right? By teaching that human beings, not spirits, were the ones that were meant to rule over nature. So instead of having to bring an offering to the God of fertility so your crops grow, you could actually just decide to plant your seed and pay attention to the weather and the soil and stuff and do it yourself and just pray to God. But he doesn't need you to do a special offering to have your crops grow. Like the idea that we had to appease the spirits who ruled everything. When you watch Little Mermaid, Trident is in charge of the ocean, right? You got to go through, and the Bible says, no, we worship the God of heaven and earth, the God of the seas and everything in them, right? We worship the God who's over everything, not the God of the water, the God of the bread, the God of the sky, the God of the cars, the God of this. And so by freeing us from this, that we made a world and he's not part of it, we can study it. That's what allowed technology to develop. This is uncontrovertible, but we have to understand it. We have to understand how we've been fed since we were little. Animism, and cartoons, colorful, awesome, wonderful animism. Like, I just want it. It looks so clean and good. And it's offering you poverty and death. It's a true story. The worldview that made it possible for the West to use nature rationally for human ends. Though it's true that many of the West have abused technology. Okay, I did that. I'm back over here. No, this is right. So, so the worldview made it possible for the West to naturally to use nature rationally for human ends. Though it's true that many in the West have abused it, right? So it is true that people dump chemicals into the thing, right? I mean, it is true that the train that explodes over in the middle of the country that no one wants to see is bad, right? Those are bad things. But they also didn't upgrade their trains when they're supposed to and follow. But okay, whatever. Biblical cosmology was not the only force behind the rise of the West's humanitarian technology. Christian compassion was an equally important factor. This is a big one. Christian spirituality has emphasized compassion, service, and liberation far more than the need to establish human dominion over creation. In other words, we recognize that, okay, look, we're in charge of things, and we're also in charge of things to alleviate the suffering of people when possible, right? The question is, so I mentioned in the hospitals and stuff, why is it that it's an American hospital that you get the best care? And if you say you don't get the best care, I'm like, fine, go have your baby in Mexico, on a street, in Uganda, in a field. I've never met a person saying, I'm flying to Uganda right now to go out in the field and have a baby. Right? I mean, it's awesome here. And when you come, there's nothing wrong with you having it in your bathtub and stuff, but I'm just saying, something goes wrong, you're not staying in your bathtub anymore. And I'm not criticizing you, all right? But you do like Avatar a little bit more than maybe you should, is all I'm saying. I'm just saying, just thinking about it. Just think about it, is all. Technology isn't the enemy. The question is, why did Christian monks develop technology? Why didn't Buddhist monks? Right? The Buddhist monks did not lack creative genius. In Afghanistan, they excelled in architectural feats, such as constructing enormous statues, right? The Buddha at Bamiyan, which lasted for a millennium before the Taliban destroyed them. There's another group. The Buddhist and Christian monks shared one problem in common, which is what? They could not take wives to grind their grain. A crucial difference between the two was that Buddhism required monks to beg for their food, whereas the Bible required Christians to work for theirs. The Apostle Paul wrote that a person who did not work should not eat. So half the time when you see someone that's homeless today and you feel bad about it, it's true, you have compassion for a person made in God's image, and it is unfortunate that person doesn't have resources. But in many cases, you're looking at someone who is mentally ill and on drugs. And there's a combination of things that are happening here. But the idea that you just give them needles and more drugs is not compassion. That's not compassion. The idea that you're supposed to let them poop on the street in front of your house is not compassion. The idea that you're going to give more money to corrupt bureaucrats to allow more people to do that and then lecture you about your lack of compassion as they steal more people's money and make their administration bigger is not compassion. If you go back, do me a favor, go back and look at from 8, 9, 10 years ago, some of the Gavin Newsom's comments about the homeless population and the money we need to fix it. We're talking billions. We got all of it, and our homeless population went up 600%. You think money is the issue? Look at our public schools. Oh, public schools have enough money. Oh, they have plenty of money. But now we have the diversity inclusion department in every university making millions of dollars. Giving more money to countries with corruption in them just gives more money to the warlords and the dictators, right? Well, that's what we have in our system right now. They've just been taken over by little mini warlords and dictators. If it sounds like I'm being a conspiratorial, I'm not. I'm being honest. Benedict's followers, for example, accepted the dictum that work is prayer, but they also felt attention. They had come to a monastery to pray, not to grind grain. The theological factor that resolved their tension and drove technology was that the Bible distinguished work from toil. And this is an interesting dynamic. To work was to be like God, right? God made and created and it was good. When we get to heaven, we're going to do work. Imagine lifting weights and only getting stronger. Imagine building a house and it only being awesome. Or seriously, like if you do a run and you stop and you're like, oh, I'm going to decay later tomorrow. But imagine just doing something and getting stronger from it. Building a house, planting something, and it always turns into an awesome crop. How fun is it? Are you bummed out by the toil of working? No, it's awesome. When you do sports, if you took all the sensations of a marathon and I strapped you into a chair and I just made you feel those sensations, it would be the worst kind of torture you've ever felt in your life. You'd feel like you're going to die because you are. But when you're doing a marathon, you're like, it's like I get a runner's high. And your body looks like you're like in a concentration camp sometimes, right? Like you see some of these runners, like they do that to themselves and they love it. What's the difference? One is work, the other one is torture. Do you see the difference, what I'm saying? But there's what redeems it? What redeems it, right? To work is to be like God, but to toil was a curse on human sin. Toil was mindless, repetitive, dehumanizing labor. So in the athlete that's running, what do you get out of the running? What do you get out of the athletic endeavor is you get stronger muscles, better oxygen, more capillaries, bringing oxygen to your muscle. Like, great. What do you get from the torture chamber? Pain for pain's sake. Right? The distinction enabled Christian monks to realize that human beings should not have to do what wind, water, or horses can do. Oh, that poor horse, we should take it. All right, cool. Let me know how that goes. People must do what other species and natural forces cannot do, use creative reason to liberate human beings from the curse of toil. Right? That's why a silverback gorilla will always beat a bear because it has opposable thumbs and can pick up the AR-15s, right? I kid. The popular misconception that technology is applied science keeps people from understanding that the humanizing technology is a peculiar product of the Bible. So again, White wrote, it's astonishing to our 20th century minds how little impact Galileo and his circle had upon the technology either of their own time or the following 200 years. In other words, we get the impression that, look at Galileo, these guys, they made all this technology. Historian Jacques Barzun tells that the science and technology merged only in AD 1890 after chemist Sir Alfred Mond persuaded a group of businessmen to take advantage of what we now call R&D, research and development. Only then did industry begin hiring scientists to find processes that engineers could embody in machines and appliances. Let me put that in normal language for you. Science before this was a subject that you would do for no purpose except its own enjoyment. And it was only after you get research and development that science was now applied to actually producing things that actually did stuff that you would actually use. And that didn't happen until much later. Well, what brought about that change? Right? Western technology is not a result of the 18th century Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a result of the Western invention of invention. Let me say it again. It's a big statement. Western technology, the thing that's letting you, if you're at home watching this right now, while you're going to the bathroom, some of you, if you're doing that, sorry. I just realized we just had an intimate moment. I apologize. Make sure you wash your hands. Western technology is not a result of the 18th century Industrial Revolution. So it's not like that just came about as a byproduct. The Industrial Revolution was a result of the Western invention of invention. And so, for example, I mentioned that with the drug companies. Right now, when we want to make the drug companies have less profits, what we're doing is de-incentivizing making new drugs. So the argument is, we got to make drugs cheaper. And Americans do pay more. And the argument is everyone else should pay more. And I agree that everyone else should pay more. But to say that the drug companies in America should get less profit, well, what incentivizes them to make actually better drugs that help things with cancer, that help things with development? Like money, they need to have a product that incentivizes them. Just say, do it for the good of anything, doesn't work. And it's so wrong-headed, and it doesn't realize it. So we're like, look, I got cheaper drugs. I'm like, and you'll never have new ones again. That's what's going on. Right? The chief glory, listen to this as a quote, says, the chief glory of the later Middle Ages was not its cathedrals or its epics or its scholasticism. It was the building for the first time in history a complex civilization which rested not on the backs of sweating slaves or coolies, but primarily on non-human power. Think about how much has changed since the 80s. Literally. Again, the iPhone was invented in 2007. So all of you that were born in the late 1900s, Like, I went to school, like when I was learning things in school, I had to actually use the Dewey Decimal System and actually look in the Encyclopedia Britannica. I actually had to carry books and use, when I had to write a paper, I had to actually write quotes on note cards that I would keep organized for when I wrote a paper out. And then you would handwrite your paper. I actually typed things on a typewriter. I actually used a typewriter. I have a typewriter in my office right now to remind me of how wonderfully progressive I am. The collapse of the Roman Empire led to the Dark Ages with political disintegration, economic depression, and debasement of religion, and a marked decline in literary, philosophical, and scientific pursuits. But listen to this. It was in the midst of that very darkness that Christianity began revitalizing the human spirit. One expression of this renewal was the origin of liberating technology. Its uninterrupted development has been traced from the 8th, possibly 6th century to our day, to you on your iPhone right now, or your inferior Android, but whatever, right? I played golf, which I don't play golf, but I played golf the other day. I'm on my watch, and I just said golf, and it said, what course are you on? And it said, oh, is this the course? I said, yes. And it found the hole. It told me the hill, the wind speed, how far to hit. It told me literally what club to use, down to the meter. Exactly. Are you kidding me? That's amazing. I would get up there, everyone had their like eyeglass thing. I'm like, oh, it's like cardinal like 235 yards away with the thing. Like, whoa, how'd you know that? I'm like, it's my watch, like a watch. By contrast, the philosophical foundations of modern science were laid only in the 14th century, and science took off only in the 16th. Again, you look at the computing power of like the old Batman shows, like where they have a whole room for computers. That's like less than the computer that's in your toaster. You know? Technological innovations, as we shall see, took place in Christian monasteries where science grew in Christian universities. Period. End of story. Why? It's true that Christian West uses technological superiority to colonize much of the world, and that technology has created serious dangers for the environment as well as for humanity. Okay, fine. But the answer is better technology, not like not technology, right? Nevertheless, it's ideological blindness to ignore the fact that technology functioning within a biblical framework has been one of the chief instruments of human emancipation. Okay, let's go through this really quick. There's a couple examples really quick. So the fore and aft rig, the lateen sail. Here's like some examples, right? The Dark Ages were dark from the point of view of literature. Therefore, we have little information on who invented the fore and aft rig to sail against the wind. Some historians think the technique may have originated as early as the 2nd century after Christ. What we do know, however, is that this invention eliminated the galley and slave labor. We also know that the Bible was the intellectual and moral force that made slavery abhorrent. Okay, we do know, going further from this whole thing, that in the succeeding centuries, the Bible played the most important role in promoting technology that liberated slaves, period. Wasn't atheism, wasn't Buddhism, wasn't Islam. We also know that back then secularism did not exist, and neither pagan philosophies nor temples promoted or celebrated technology that emancipated slaves. No one did. Although it has been fashionable to deny it, anti-slavery doctrines began to appear in Christian theology soon after the decline of Rome, and were accompanied by the eventual disappearance of slavery in all but the fringes of Christian Europe. What brought that about? Think about this. What this book is claiming is so audacious and true. It should offend you to the nth degree that we decided not to teach this in our schools. We literally, the moment we said we're going to divorce this from our schools, we became lesser, and we continue to become lesser, and we become lesser every day until you get to Cardi B and all the rest. Again, this book and the principles of this book have made people not have poverty. It's made people wealthy. It's made technology exist. It's made the things that you love exist. It's healed, brought up medicine that's healed people. It's done all of these wonderful things. It has alleviated and emancipated people from actual slavery. And then you have some bombastic idiot telling you that Christianity is bad for the world. Sam Harris says this. Really, Sam Harris. There were good economic reasons for using the lateen sail, for example. It increased the average speed of the ship, lowered the cost, reduced the size of the crew, and enabled ships to go farther. But as my experience in Jinja demonstrates, our materialistic age overestimates the power of economics, right? It wasn't just like, well, look how helpful this is. A culture will not invest in wheelbarrows or pumps if its decision makers feel that there's a surplus of time and woman or manpower. So think about that. Only a society with a theological climate that values human dignity begins using technology as a force for human emancipation and empowerment. Guess what we're doing in our country? Instead of solving the problems our country has with technology and deregulating and letting American people, have answers to the problems we face, they're saying, you know what? Let's regulate the crap out of people, stop people from doing anything, and basically import slave labor. That's literally that's the game. That's the trade-off we've decided to make. That's where we're going. Instead of using technology, like it's just amazing to me. The Chinese were using iron plows while Europeans were still using wooden ones. Well, that's interesting. Yet, they continued using iron long after Europe had graduated to steel. Clearly, something was renewing the spirit of European peasants, even while its post-Roman literary culture was still mired in the Dark Ages. The peasants' humble wheeled plow generated the economic strength that helped save Europe from colonization by Islam. I mean, you say kind of go back to these things. Environmentalists condemn the heavy plow for violently breaking and turning over hard soil. Ugh. Who are these people? Economists credit it for saving labor by making cross-plowing unnecessary. Social historians recognize that the development and cultural acceptance of the new plow required a mindset that saw human dominion over earth as a divine mandate. This is the same argument as being happened when it comes to oil and drilling for oil. Literally 3 or 4 years ago, gas was 4 times less than it is right now. And we want it. I mean, that's what we're having. So that gas isn't just for your car. That makes the plastics and the things you buy and all the food that's shipped and everything you have. It's made everything go up. You combine that by saying no one can go to work anymore except the government and bars. And let's make pot legal and the rest. I mean, like what's going on? And you start saying to yourself, well, hey, what's happening here? All three environmentalists, such as Huxley, economists, such as Landis, and historians, such as White, agree, all these critics agree, that the Bible created Europe's theological outlook. Everyone does. So this isn't like a fringe movement. Everyone says it. Everyone says this. And this, they said, which justified human management of the environment and began revitalizing Europe's economy during the Dark Ages. Again, the horse isn't native to Europe, so historians puzzle over why it was European peasants who first made the life and strength of their horses with 3 simple technologies. Horseshoe, the horse collar, and the tandem harness. So these 3 inventions solved 3 long-standing problems. First, broken hooves soon rendered horses useless. Second, the yoke harness system, quite suitable for oxen, was extremely inefficient for faster horses, and the yoke's front strap pressed on a horse's windpipe. So the harder a horse pulled, the closer it came to strangulation. That system also made it impossible to harness one horse in front of another. So Santa would never have his sleigh otherwise, right? So third, since animal power was technically unavailable in sufficient quantities to pull great weights, all cultures relied on gangs of slaves for large projects. So when people say, let's get rid of technology, what they're saying is, let's have people carry you on their backs across the freeways. Right back to the old days with singers running next to you singing the songs. Look how much we're saving the environment. To solve the first problem, Europeans invented the horseshoe, which protected the horse's feet. Okay, it just solves all this stuff, okay? Which is awesome. The water mill, the windmill, the crank, it just describes this a little bit. It's pretty neat. But the idea of harnessing water and wind energy for human emancipation from the drudgery of toil did not take hold in either the Islamic or the Buddhist world. Why not? The West was different. The first recorded use of the water mill came in the 6th century abbot Gregory of Tours. This Gallic bishop and historian was deeply troubled by the sight of his monks grinding grain in these primitive grain mills, right? So he encouraged the invention or reinvention of the water mill to relieve them of this odious duty. Following him, European monasteries and communities began using the water mill in the 10th and 11th centuries and the windmill in the 12th century to power labor-saving devices. You know what happened? These monks and monasteries became economic powerhouses. An independent description of the monastic life at Clairvaux in that period enthusiastically describes the automatic flour sifter attached to the flour mill, and the narrator thanks God that such machines can alleviate the oppressive labors of both man and beast. And it gives a long list of tasks that can be accomplished by water power. Think about this for a minute. So when people try to make you feel like technology is not your purview as a Christian, they're 100% wrong. The wheelbarrow might have been a Chinese invention, so why didn't China's Hindu and Muslim neighbors fail to see its potential, right? Cutting in half the labors needed for hauling their loads. I mean, why is it that you go into places and people are still riding those bicycles with giant things on their back, right? It was not until the latter part of the 13th century that the use of wheelbarrow became popular in Western Europe. Ever since then, wheels have been displacing men everywhere, except in cultures where some human beings, women, children, slaves, servants, minorities, and lower castes, are deemed less human than others. One of my favorite ones that you see a lot is people say, look at these small cars from Europe. Now, I get it. They look at these small little trucks. They do so much work. They do a lot of work because they live on lame roads with lame infrastructure that they can't actually... Big honking trucks that carry big honking loads is what made this country great. True story. You live in this country because of big, giant trucks. Just a straight story. If you don't like that idea, you're like, no, I like the little truck that goes around. I'm like, cool, go live in your commune somewhere and try to get, like, your sushi. Your sushi didn't come on the truck from the boat. It came from a big honking thing. Some of the best sushi you're going to get is in Las Vegas. Like, we live in an amazing culture. That came because of technology. That anti-technology bent is like against like people. And it's against God. I mean, as you get back to it, I mean, you come back to some of these basic ideas because we say, well, people are less human. This one, again, this is my whole point when it comes to some of the food wars. Yes, we should have better foods. Yes, we should have less crap in our foods and less stuff. But sometimes what we want from our foods is not sustainable for lots of people to eat cheaply. If you want to eat healthy right now, you have to be rich. Well, maybe not, unless you grow, right? But like, you have to have the time to grow, the wherewithal to grow. But if you want to just eat well today, it's hard. It's hard to eat healthy. You want to get enough protein in your food? I mean, come on now, that's hard to do, right? So anyways, we talked about this, wheelbarrows, flywheels, all this stuff, okay? It codifies the skills needed to make the church for the glory of God. They just talked about these things. Listen to this, ready? Again, the thing that became the key to economic success of the West came out of religious motivations. Almost done here. What is the ultimate meaning of technology? Ask yourself the question. Like, for example, paper is a technology. Your iPad is a technology. This is a technology. Why invent it? Why use it, right? Because this is certainly a lot better than carrying on a giant scroll. And some think that the iPad is better than carrying around this, except I like this not being a battery power. But I'm a bit of a Luddite that I like to go back to this old school thing. But if you stop and think about the purpose of technology, what is the purpose of technology, right? Innovating for economic reasons is pretty new, actually, right? Most inventors remain poor even today. Inventing new technologies requires tremendous dedication, intense labor, and many failures and frustrations, so why bother? There is profit in it, but why bother anyways? The Bible did solve this problem for this guy named Theophilus. Not from the Bible, a different guy. He did with technology what Augustine did with music. Technology was not just useful for him, it was also meaningful. Its purpose was to use human creativity for the glory of God and for the service of the weak. The absence of that worldview prevented Indian monks from developing technology. Again, you can be relatively poor in the standards of this country and still have air conditioning. You can be relatively poor and drive in a vehicle. You don't have to have slaves carry you. You don't have to actually walk. You don't have to put things on your head. You can actually get cheap suitcases. You can actually go to Walmart. The mechanical clock provided the nursery of mechanical engineering in the West. So it goes in, again, non-biblical cultures didn't create mechanical clocks. Why? Because they didn't value time in the same way the culture shaped by the Bible did. People are like, it doesn't matter, right? Basically, the technology for clocks went around forever, but communal prayer required everyone in these monasteries to keep the same time, so the clock became a key instrument. Therefore, Christians used it. Isn't that interesting? Time management was practical as well as a religious necessity. So when you're late all the time and don't care about the clock and you think that you're being like cool like Jesus would be, nope, you're being like a pagan. You late pagan. Oh, you like to show up late because whatever, cool pagan. How's it hanging with Gandhi? Like, that's like, enjoy yourself. Like, Jesus is on time, always right on time. That's why he doesn't speed. He's always right on time, right? The Bible-shaped culture made time management an aspect of establishing human dominion over the physical universe because the Bible saw time as part of physical reality. No other culture did this. By contrast, in Indian culture, time was perceived as either an eternal but terrible god or as part of a cosmic illusion. Like Europe, his country, India, had religious communes and genius inventors. So why then did we fail to develop clocks or an indigenous tradition of mechanical engineering? What we lacked was the biblical worldview. We did not see the universe as an intelligent creation. We saw it either as divine or as a dream. That's amazing, as everything or as nothing, right? But not as a real creative product of intellect, will, and work. Because of this worldview, our monks did not spend intellectual energy to master and manage time. They spent their years finding ways to escape the endless wheel of time through mind-emptying meditation. Their goal was to escape work, not make it easier. Guys, how many people's motivation is that today in our country? We want technology so workers can work less. They did not need clocks because they were seeking escape from social obligations. Oof. They were not seeking salvation from the curse of toil through communally synchronized economic enterprise. They talk about eyeglasses. It's great. It says, our monks did not develop technical aids to improve their eyesight. They took pride in closing even perfectly good eyes in meditation. Even today, our yogis fly to distant galaxies and out-of-body experiences. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the promoter of the transcendental meditation in the West, popularized one of the yogic techniques of levitation through meditation in corporate America. Why would anyone invent airplanes if he can fly using daydreams? Christian monks were different because the Bible gave them a different worldview. I mean, that's the idea, right? while our monks have continued to try to meditate, levitate, and fly. I mean, that's kind of what he goes through. A few more things. He says, technology develops when people use their muscles and also allowed to develop their minds and have the leisure to use them. This means that Benz's thesis has to be qualified. Medieval technology did not develop in ivory towers of universities, but in the humdrum of economic life of Christian monasteries. Why? And again, because monastic life was a life, originally it tried to actually go back to the Bible. It was considered low class, but let me kind of, and they valued work, where Paul was like a tent maker, all right? But essentially, the Renaissance's return, it says the passion for the glory of God kept technology from becoming an idol, a false and destructive God, so they could develop it. But the Renaissance, when it returned to classical, listen to this is a really fascinating point. You think of the Renaissance as the technological harbinger of everything we have. But when the Renaissance came about and returned to the Greek thinking classics, right? The Greek and Roman literature helped to create a cultural climate that it actually delayed the development of Western technology. Think about it. It went back to Plato, and there's a delayed technology. Why? Because it made matter bad and not matter. For until the 18th century, Western universities taught theology, philosophy, law, medicine, and mathematics, but not technology. The intellectual foundations for Western technology that had been laid in the monasteries by monks, such as Hugh of St. Victor in Paris, continued to influence culture outside the university of the Renaissance. And that's why we said before they came together later. If modern technology was a force for humanization, then why do some postmodern critics condemn technology as the dehumanizing force? Why did they make Avatar? During the previous millennium, biblical Christianity has replaced a pagan world ruled by spirits with a secular world stewarded by human ingenuity and technology. That's the Christians that did that. So remember I told you that secularism, even in all of its negativity, was a byproduct of the Reformation. That's why I like this book, because it's making the case I've been trying to make all this time. I'd say that, and I just know you guys heard it and it sounded neat, but you had no idea what I meant. Now you know what I mean. The Reformation, the biblical worldview, is what made secularization a thing that exists. Now, secularization is a good thing in some respects. It's a bad thing when it says, let's get rid of the Bible. But secularization has made the natural sciences. It says, God made the world, and since God made the world, he's not himself the world. He made the world that has order with rules and logic and physics. And so I can study the sciences and I can cut that thing open. I'm not cutting open God. I can study that and know that the measurements are going to be objective and true. And so it motivates me to go forward. So a secular culture, when you go look at these things, I'm not invoking God to measure something, right? But it doesn't mean God's not important. So what happened is the secularists said, look, we could do all these things. Let's just get rid of God. And so now we're back to paganism. That's why this book is so important. Anyways, again, today many in the post-Christian West view machines as evil spirits. Again, Hollywood, for example, is producing a whole genre of movies inspired by the idea that the human problem is not a conflict between good and evil, but between humanity and machines. I mean, AI, the problem with AI is the people programming it, not the technology, but the people programming it. The problem with Twitter or X or whatever is who runs it and the censorship on it. The problem with dumb ideas needs to be solved by good ideas. Right? Look at some of these movies. He talked about The Matrix, The Terminator, Star Trek, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. But in each of these, in The Matrix, for example, it was basically Buddhism that defeats the technology of The Matrix. You have aliens from spaceship using people as batteries. Look at how bad technology is sucking us dry. And the answer is what? Buddhism. Be the spoon. And so Neo he's a Buddhist, and that's the salvation. We're like, I love it. And I do like it's deconstruction of a lot of things, but what it adds in its place is what? Deconstruction for its own sake, for salvation's sake. And then the lighter ones are really bad. The Terminator, okay, we get it. Arnold's awesome, though. Star Trek, I've never watched Star Trek. That's for nerds. If you watch Star Trek, good for you. The colors of their shirts always made me feel like icky. Like it was this gross 70s kind of color, and just their outfits are very unflattering. I just never liked Star Trek. It just seems weird. It's just weird to me. So whatever, Star Trek. Right? Films such as Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that was amazing, but it exalted the magic of Buddhist meditation rather than technological innovation. Again, technology is the bad guys. All right? They ignore the fact that the historically proven wonder of the mind is technology, not meditation that empties one's mind. So, talks about Gandhi and the way they view things, but let me keep going, okay? Just as the pyramids symbolize the glory of Egypt, the Taj Mahal does the same in India. Listen to this. He goes, The eyewitnesses of the Taj Mahal that they have are some of the most important that we have right now. It's this guy named, it says, from Surat to this place, all the highways was stowed with dead people. Our nose is never free from the stink of them. Women were seen to roast their children. A man or a woman no sooner dead, but they were cut in pieces to be eaten. Why? This is about India, right? During the time of the Taj Mahal. It says the monsoon had failed and people had nothing to eat. Why was Indian agriculture so dependent on rains? Northern India had many perennial rivers fed by the Himalayan glaciers. Couldn't the people who built the Taj Mahal build dams and canals for peasants? Why didn't 17th century India store food in warehouses as a buffer for drought years like they did in the Bible 2,000 years earlier? Right? Why not? Like, why weren't the people producing a surplus and saving for emergencies? Like AD 1600, like why not? He goes, my 17th century ancestors did not starve because they were stupid, lazy, or unproductive. A people need more than ingenuity to develop their lands and technology to increase productivity and save for emergencies. Listen to this. This is us now. They need wise leadership, political stability, just laws, fair taxation, and economic security. Shah Jahan's grandfather, Akbar, tried to give some justice to his subjects for a few years, but by the 1620s, India was being governed as usual. Taxes, the king's share, had risen from 1/2 to 2/3 of one's produce. Beyond this, the tax collectors collected their income from the peasants. So they had to resort to extortion because they were not paid salaries. The peasants were left with no more than 18 to 20% of what they produced. That was a huge incentive against being creative and productive. The only way to make money was to join the exploiters. That's our system right now. All the jobs that just have been created in this last thing, they shut down the economy, and all the jobs that are being created aren't jobs that we used to have, they're government jobs. And if you work for the government, good for you. You're making money. But Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim kingdoms did not exist to serve people. The people existed for the glory of their rulers, not for the glory of God. The famine of 1631 was a massive tragedy because India's leadership had been busy exploiting their subjects to build grand monuments such as the Red Fort in Delhi, the Taj Mahal in Agra, and artifacts such as Peacock Throne, thanks to which it was said the world had run short of gold. So while we go across the world, literally, like I said last week, Biden went to Vietnam and talked about climate change being our biggest problem. Asia and Africa didn't lack ability, but ability alone doesn't produce liberating technology. While that all happened, people died. Non-biblical cultures need more than technology. They need a philosophy that values people. And we don't have that anymore. Outside, we just don't. Technology is indeed secular. A person of any faith, no faith, can develop and use it, but secularism does not liberate. As Professor Stark has shown his research on slavery and abolition, a virtual who's who's of Enlightenment figures fully accepted slavery. It was not philosophers or secular intellectuals who assembled the moral indictment of slavery, but the very people they held in such contempt. Men and women having intense Christian faith who opposed slavery because it was a sin. The larger point is that abolitionists, whether popes or evangelists, spoke almost exclusively in the language of Christian faith. Although many Southern clergy in America did propose theological defenses of slavery, pro-slavery rhetoric was overwhelmingly secular. References were made to liberty and states' rights, not to sin or salvation in those cases. Biblical theology abolished slavery because it considered slavery to be sinful. The kinds of slavery, like when you look at old school slavery in the Old Testament, that was less about the kind of slavery you talked about today and more of an economic system like joining the military where you could make money, you would be part of it. It was like how you dealt with debts. But modern slavery, where it was just taking you against your will and you had no choice, that was different. But technology is not enough for technology is not enough to challenge a culture of slavery. The task calls for a heroic spirit, which is going to happen next week. But so kind of summarize this whole idea. What this book is saying is that when you look at the like this one right here, the taxation and the people, what they need. I mean, when you talk about the lands, the technology, the things they don't have, I mean, it's just crazy. Right? I mean, it's crazy when you think about people taxing the crap out of people and not getting the things they need to go forward. I mean, Gandhi was against these things. And then they had to fix it. Guys, all the rhetoric you're hearing from every sphere is anti-technology and anti-Western, and it's all linking it to Christianity. And it's right. Christianity, it goes with technology. It's ironic, that we would say, let's use our iPhones and march against capitalism. I'm like, that's weird. The idea that you're going to go to school and learn about how to invent and how to think and how to do stuff, and they're going to instead just indoctrinate you onto people's genitals. Let's talk about genitals all day. Let's talk about it. Like, I sometimes feel like a two-spirit because sometimes my genitals feel like this, and how do your genitals feel today? What genitals let's talk about today? And they just talk about their private parts all day and then wear a mask on their face. And that's what it's about. Like, I'm a private part person. Like, you can see the color of my hair, and then I can tell you what I identify as. And let's just talk about that, and let's just read books about that, and let's just make it about that. What happened? When did America invent? Let's change the invention of America. Who was Abraham Lincoln? I don't even know. What happened on September 11th, 2001? Those man on the street interviews are crazy. Who's the president right now? Who's the first president of the United States? Right? How many branches of government are there? You start asking basic questions like, that's just school stuff, right? You start to think to yourself like, all the innovation, the technology that you see, the worst sin in so many cases of the church today, the modern church, has been allowing bullies that don't know anything to chase the church from the public square. And so what happens is churches build their campuses and they say, we're going to do our church activities on our campus. We're going to have everything church at home. And so we're going to live in we'll only be Christians in these walls. Because out there, the faith doesn't even have anything to say about out there. Just think about how ignorant you have to be to pretend like that, to live like that, to actually think that the car you drive and the technology you use and the universities that exist and the things that we have, that all that stuff that came from this book, that you're like, oh, I got to stop thinking about God and Jesus because that doesn't fit in the secular world. The secular world doesn't fit. The secular world only fits in the Christian world. The secular world is dying very quickly again. I said to you before, and it is now becoming a paganism. And again, science is becoming shamanism. The government is becoming deified. Like the middle class is going away. Servants are going to come back and fix the stuff that we can't fix with technology because we've regulated people out of it. These are Christian ideas that have to do with how we value God, technology, the place we live. If we think the climate's going to destroy the world, then we think that, think about this, the climate's going to destroy the world. How dare you? The climate's going to destroy the world. She's wrong. It didn't get destroyed yet. No apologies. So here's the answer. Give more money to corrupt politicians so they can change the weather in 100 years and give all their friends and their cronies money while they take away literally the economic progress in our nation, which makes people poorer in our country, it makes people poor in other countries, it makes people less safe, it makes trade less capable, it makes people have more poverty, more challenges, more sicknesses, it alleviates the production of medicines, it alleviates the production of technology that could fix things, that could give people a higher quality of life. All those normal things you'd see come from a bad worldview. So do not retreat from the culture. Do not retreat from technology. And when people come into the church, don't be hidden little ghetto, like we're here. This is our Christian language, our Christian culture. You be a Christian boldly in public because that's your public. Let me pray. God, I pray and ask that you would help us to understand how important the world we live in was made by your word and the principles from your word. Help us to understand that we have the motivation to do science, to love technology, to embrace medicine. Father, you are good, and we thank you for your wonderful, wonderful stewardship you've given us to be on this planet. And as we have taken that and people have chosen to worship themselves and the government, all these things, I pray that as your church, as your people, we can reorient ourselves to the truth and that we would be freed from the tyranny of these things. God, I don't know what's going to happen in this country, but we know that we are citizens of a better country. I pray that we would be bold right now to be on our task of making disciples, but also while we do still have a stewardship here in this country, help us not to go to sleep. Help us to be bold about the things that are ours and understand why they're valuable. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we'll see you next week, God willing. Don't be pagan late.